गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं नमः। विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्ता स्वामिनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषा शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे। संसार दावा नललीडलोका त्राणाय कारुण्या घन घन त्वं प्राप्तस्य कल्याण गुणार्णवस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं। महाप्रभो कीर्तन नित्य गीता वादित्रमद्यान् मनसोरसेना रोमाञ्चकम्पा श्रुतरङ्गभाजो वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं। श्रीविग्रहाराधन नित्यनाना श्रृंगार तन्मन्दिरमार्जनादो युक्तस्य भक्तांश्च नियुञ्जतोऽपि वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं। चतुर्विधा श्री भगवत्प्रसादो स्वादन्न तृप्तान् हरिभक्तसंज्ञान् कृत्वेव तृप्तिं भजत सदेव वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं। श्रीराधिका माधवयोरपारा माधुर्यलीला गुणरूपनाम्नां प्रतीक्षन्ना स्वादनलोलुपस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं। निकुञ्जयो नो रतिकेलिसिद्धे यायालिभियोक्तिरपेक्षणीया तत्रातिदाक्षात् अतिवल्लभस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं। साक्षात् हरित्वेन समस्तशास्त्रैर् उक्तस्तथा भाव्यत एव साध्भिः किन्तु प्रभोर्या प्रिय एव तस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं। यस्य प्रसादात् भगवत्प्रसादो यस्य प्रसादात् न गति कुतोऽपि ध्यायन्स्तुवंस्तस्य यशस्ते सन्ध्यं वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं। नमः ॐ विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्ता स्वामिनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषा शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण। नमस्ते नरसिंहाय प्रह्लाद दायिने हिरण्यकाशिपूर्वक्षः शिलाटंका नखालाए इतो नरसिंह परतो नरसिंहो यतो यतो यामि ततो नरसिंह बहिर्नरसिंहो हृदये नरसिंहो नरसिंहमदिं शरणं प्रपदे तव कर कमलवरे नखाम अद्भुत श्रृंगाम दलिता हिरण्यकशिपु तनुभृंगाम केशवधृता नरहरि रूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय नरसिंहदेव 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 जय नरसिंहदेव जय प्रहलाद महाराज प्रहलाद महाराज प्रहलाद महाराज जय प्रहलाद महाराज विंध्याय तुलसी देव्याय प्रियाय केशवस्य च कृष्ण भक्ति प्रदे देवी सत्यवते नमो नमः विंध्याय तुलसी देव्याय प्रियाय केशवस्य च कृष्ण भक्ति प्रदे देवी सत्यवते नमो नमः विंध्याय तुलसी देव्याय प्रियाय केशवस्य च कृष्ण भक्ति प्रदे देवी सत्यवते नमो नमः नमो नमः तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी नमो नमः राधा कृष्ण सेवा पावो ऐ अभिलाषी जे तोमार शरण लया तारा वांछा पूर्ण होया कृपा करी करो तारे वृंदावन वासी मोराए अभिलाष विलास कुंज दियो वास नयन हेरी बो सदा जुगल रूप रास
Yes, Maharaj.
क्या रेटिंग चल रहा है ग्लोरी ऑफ इंडिया किताब है मिल गया
हाँ ये श्रीमद् भागवतम
Glory of India, history of the Hare Krishna movement in Delhi. ISKCON first office in Delhi. Srila Prabhupada continued to travel regularly to Delhi, sometimes staying overnight at the invitation of old friends and acquaintances. Then, by Lord Krishna's mercy, on one such visit, Srila Prabhupada had been invited to stay at the home of Mr. Hitsaran Sharma, the manager of Radha Press, where Srila Prabhupada had some years earlier printed pamphlets and leaflets on behalf of Jhansi's League of Devotees. Mr. Sharma introduced Srila Prabhupada to Pandit Sri Krishna Sharma, a learned scholar, pious religionist, and Mahant of the Sri Sri Radha Krishna temple in Old Delhi's Chippiwada area, which was located behind the famous Jama Masjid. Realizing that Srila Prabhupada was a very saintly person and also an erudite Vedic scholar, Sharmaji wanted to help Srila Prabhupada in his missionary activities and immediately offered Srila Prabhupada a permanent place to stay in Delhi, free of rent, in a room on the upper floor of his temple, to be used as both an office and living quarters whenever Srila Prabhupada visiting the city. Having obtained the office in Chippiwada at the end of 1959, Srila Prabhupada began his now famous translation of the Srimad Bhagavatam and would spend long hours of the day and night engaged in typing the manuscript. Srila Prabhupada believed that the English edition of the Bhagavatam would form the spiritual and philosophical basis from which he would preach in America. And by selling these books, he could generate enough funds to support himself in America while he established his mission, which he planned to call the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. After taking sannyas, Srila Prabhupada's focus changed and he began to seriously think of going to America and establishing a worldwide spiritual organization devoted to spreading Krishna consciousness and propagating Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement, which was based on the congregational chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada had formulated the name International Society for Krishna Consciousness, ISKCON, based on Srila Rupa Goswami's original idea. While living at the Radha Damodar Mandir in Vrindavan, Srila Prabhupada had imbibed Srila Rupa Goswami's conception of an integrated worldwide Vaishnava movement under the banner of Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement. Thus, from his new office at the Radha Krishna Mandir, Srila Prabhupada embarked on a new phase in his life as he began to write the first ever English translation of Srimad Bhagavatam. It can therefore be said that Srila Prabhupada's office in Old Delhi's Chippiwada area, besides being a base in Delhi for printing his books and magazines, was in fact ISKCON's first de facto office. In 1960, Srila Prabhupada published his first ever book, a small paperback edition entitled Easy Journey to Other Planets.
Which year?
1960.
देखो कॉपी पेन
Spelling.
कॉपी पेन कॉपी है वहाँ कहाँ पे है देखो खाली देखो इसे करो भागवतम क्या था
In 1960, Srila Prabhupada published his first ever book, a small paperback edition entitled Easy Journey to Other Planets.
published easy journey छुपी हुआ
The publication of this book occurred after Srila Prabhupada had heard that two American scientists had received a Nobel Prize in Physics for discovering the antiportion. The discovery gave rise to speculation in scientific circles about an anti-material world. After coupled with the ongoing space race between the Americans and the Russians, after the Russians had launched the world's first satellite called the Sputnik, the media was full of talk about the new frontiers of science and space exploration. Thus, feeling inspired, Srila Prabhupada began writing the book Easy Journey to Other Planets about the transcendental process of bhakti, yoga, and the ability of yogis to travel to other planets. That included a description of the anti-material spiritual world called Vaikuntha. In August 1960, after raising sufficient donations, Srila Prabhupada published his Easy Journey to Other Planets as a paperback edition with a foreword by Dr. N.K. Siddhanta, the then Vice Chancellor of Delhi University. After publication, Srila Prabhupada received a lot of After publication, Srila Prabhupada received a lot of very good reviews from a number of prominent scientists around India. It was a momentous occasion for Srila Prabhupada as it was the first complete book that he had ever published. When the same book, popularly referred to as Easy Journey, was later reprinted in America in 1917, it was such a revelation. Yes, Maharaj, 1917. What's date? It was such a revelation that it created a sensation amongst the younger generation. After reading it, many Americans and Europeans became convinced about the authenticity and scientific basis of Bhakti Yoga, and many were converted to Krishna consciousness and joined Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON movement. During the year 1960, Srila Prabhupada was spending his time between Vrindavan and his Chippiwada office in Delhi. During this period, after receiving some donation from well-wisher, Srila Prabhupada once again began printing the Back to Godhead magazine and was also holding regular discourses on the Srimad Bhagavatam at the residence of Dr. Banerjee, a former director of the National Museum of Delhi. Dr. Banerjee. He used to come to the library and consult some books, and I met him there. He gave me a book called Easy Journey to Other Planets. He gave me some copies to distribute for a rupee or half a rupee each. I felt attracted to him. I thought he was a saintly person with pure devotion and without any outward glamour. He was not out to attract people just for name and fame. He had little support from anybody. He was living alone in a small room in Chippiwada. He was devoted to his studies. So I asked him, Sir, if you have time and you don't mind coming to my house, could you kindly come on Sundays and recite the Bhagavatam in my house? He readily agreed. He was a good scholar. He was learned in the scriptures and he was fond of communicating his ideas to others. He was a good speaker and a good conversationalist. He was very polite. Whatever he said very distinctly. He spoke in a Bengali and explained the essence of the verses. Sometimes he also referred to the commentaries just to give me more information. The others were not very much interested in commentary or in difficult aspects, but because he knew that I had some studies in the field, he explained the commentaries for my sake and for the sake of one or two other gentlemen who were also very elderly and very scholarly. The gatherings at my house would be attended by about 20 or 30 people, and he would continue his explanation for 1 or 2 hours. Then he would recite the Hare Krishna mantra, and we would also take part with the kartals and harmonium. So it was a very enjoyable gathering because he made the difficult things very easy and he explained everything to all of us according to our needs. He knew that this much is for this person, this much is intended for this man, this much for the others. After the meetings, he used to take a little rest in my house. I requested him to take meals in my house, but he said he did not take meals prepared by others. But when he met my wife and she said she would be happy to prepare the meals, he said, All right, I will take. And she used to prepare meals on Sundays when he would come. He sometimes asked me how to get more people attracted towards this field. But as a government worker, I could not persuade anyone very openly, nor had I the time to organize anything on a big scale for him. But he was not satisfied with that. He asked me if I could organize on a bigger scale. He knew that the people who attended the meetings at my house were very old, 70, 80, one was one was 90 years of age, retired, educated persons. It lasted for no less than a year. After that, he said he would be trying to go out to the other places. He asked me to continue the gatherings, but I said, I am not initiated. He said, I continue anyway because I was born as a Brahmana. He gave me the authority to continue, but I could not continue because I used to go out. I lost all interest after he left. I was a government servant. Translating the Bhagavatam in Delhi. During the year 1961, Srila Prabhupada spent most of his time at his office in Old Delhi and concentrated on the task of completing part 1 of the Srimad Bhagavatam's momentous first canto. Srila Prabhupada's daily schedule was to wake around 1 a.m. and after bathing, Srila Prabhupada's daily schedule was to wake around 1 a.m. and after bathing and chanting japa on his beads, he would begin translating the Bhagavatam around 3 a.m. He would continue translating for most of the day, taking only a short break for darshan, take a morning walk, take lunch, and then continue translating for as long as possible throughout the day, unless there were some important meetings or preaching engagements which he would attend. Srila Prabhupada was feeling greatly inspired. At long last, his life's mission to fulfill the order of his spiritual master to preach in the English language was now progressing nicely. He firmly believed that the English translation of the spiritually potent Srimad Bhagavatam would be the medium by which he could convert the English speaking people of the world to Krishna consciousness. Hearing about an important spiritual convention taking place in Japan called the Congress for Cultivating Human Spirit, which was scheduled
15-20
which was scheduled to take place on May 10, 1961. Srila Prabhupada wrote to the organizer, the International Foundation for Culture Harmony, and promptly received an invitation from the Foundation Secretary General, Mr. Toshihiro Nakano, to attend the convention as India's special representative. As part of his presentation at the conference, Srila Prabhupada had written an essay for the occasion based on the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam entitled Light of the Bhagavatam, a wonderful description and glorification of Vrindavan Dham. Srila Prabhupada had wanted that the Japanese should print this essay in book form with illustrations drawn by traditional Japanese artists. After having obtained the invitation, Srila Prabhupada had been attempting to find sponsors who could help with the travel expenses to Japan and had approached the Ministry of Culture for assistance because he had been invited to attend the prestigious conference as India's special representative. However, the ministry's officials were disinclined to lend financial support. Srila Prabhupada had even obtained a private meeting with the Vice President of India, Dr. Radha Krishnanan. But Dr. Radha Krishnanan also declined to offer any help, as no sponsors could be found to support his proposed trip to Japan. Srila Prabhupada was unfortunately unable to attend the conference. The essay that Srila Prabhupada had written entitled Light of the Bhagavata was eventually published as a book in 1976 by the American BBT and included many traditional Japanese illustrations that had been painted by a well-known Japanese artist. In July 1962, Srila Prabhupada moved his quarters located on the upper floor of the Radha Damodar Mandir to two rooms on the ground floor. In one room, he performed his bhajan and translated the Srimad Bhagavatam, and in the other, he cooked and honored prasadam. By late summer of 1962, Srila Prabhupada had almost completed translating part 1 of the Srimad Bhagavatam and was now looking for donors to help cover the cost of printing. Srila Prabhupada thought about approaching the philanthropist and well-known industrialist Seth Jayadayal Dalmia to donate for the printing. But Mr. Hitsaran Sharma, the general manager of Radha Press, who was also the secretary to Mr. Dalmia's trust, advised Srila Prabhupada that Mr. Dalmia would not be interested in sponsoring such a book and advised him that he should instead travel to Gorakhpur and show his Bhagavatam manuscript to the philanthropist publisher Sri Hanuman Prasad Poddar, the proprietor of the famous Gita Press, as he would be far more favorable to printing religious books than Mr. Dalmia. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada immediately travelled by train to Gorakhpur, and on seeing the Bhagavata manuscript, Hanuman Prasad Poddar was very impressed with Srila Prabhupada's scholarly translation and immediately agreed to donate 4,000 rupees towards the cost of printing 1,000
20
to donate 4,000 rupees toward the cost of printing 1,000 hardbound copies. Srimad Bhagavatam, printed in Delhi. On receiving the advance payment, Hit Saran Sharma began printing Srila Prabhupada's Srimad Bhagavatam at the OK press. As that particular press had the correct typeface that Srila Prabhupada wanted used in his book. From September that year, Srila Prabhupada stayed continuously at his Chipiwada office in order to personally oversee all the printing work. He not only arranged for the paper and transported it himself by cycle rickshaw. He also checked all the proofs, oversaw the binding of the book, and also designed the dust cover. By the month of December 1962, a total of 1100 copies of Part 1 of the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam had been completed. From the sales of his books, Srila Prabhupada planned to gradually pay off the balance amount that was due on the printer's bill. After receiving the first batch of his Srimad Bhagavatams, Srila Prabhupada immediately sent a complimentary copy to Hanuman Prasad Poddar, the principal donor, who wrote a very favorable review. He also sent a copy to the Vice President of India, Dr. Radhakrishnan, who gave Srila Prabhupada a personal audience and promised to read the book and then inform Srila Prabhupada about his impressions. Srila Prabhupada then sold copies to various libraries, colleges, and over 40 schools around Delhi. The Ministry of Education also took 50 copies for selected universities and institutional libraries around India, and the US Embassy took 18 copies for libraries in America. Besides the sales to various institutions, Srila Prabhupada also distributed his Srimad Bhagavatam on the streets of Delhi to offices and business establishments, and also amongst previous donors, friends, and acquaintances. Srila Prabhupada also supplied books to one of Delhi's famous bookshops located on Ansari Road in Daryaganj, known as the Manohar Bookshop. In the months that followed,
कपड़ा
वो पूरा नया कपड़ा बिछा देते हैं कुछ सब तैयार है लेटेंगे नया कपड़ा बिछा हुआ है सब चेंज कर दें
in the months that followed, Srila Prabhupada received many favorable reviews, extolling his great scholarship and deep knowledge of the subject, including those from the newly appointed Vice President of India, Dr. Zakir Hussain, who had also received a complimentary copy, and also from the Governor of Uttar Pradesh, Sri Vishwanath Das, who had also received a complimentary copy from Srila Prabhupada. Other favorable reviews were also received from a number of Srila Prabhupada's senior God brothers from the Gaudiya Math, who glorified his scholastic presentation and the great service he had done for his spiritual master. Publishing the first ever English translation of the Srimad Bhagavatam was till then perhaps Srila Prabhupada's single greatest achievement, and it proved to be a milestone in his long and sometimes arduous march towards fulfilling the order of his spiritual master to spread the message of Lord Krishna to the English speaking people of the world, completing Bhagavatam in Vrindavan. Now that part 1 of the Srimad Bhagavatam's first canto had been published, Srila Prabhupada set about with great determination to finish translating part 2. As soon as all three parts of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam were completed, Srila Prabhupada would be fully armed with the most potent of all Vedic transcendental literatures. And then he planned to sail to America to convert the English-speaking people of the Western world to Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada returned to Vrindavan in the spring of 1963 and then spent many long months in translating part 2 of the first canto, working day and night and hardly resting in order to complete the book, and thus quickly returned to Delhi and get it printed. By the end of 1963, when Srila Prabhupada had finally completed the translation of part 2, he immediately traveled to Delhi in the hope of raising funds for printing. By showing the first part of the Srimad Bhagavatam to prospective donors, Srila Prabhupada received a contribution of 5,000 rupees from an executive director of the L&H sugar factory of Delhi and immediately went to the OK Press and began printing part 2. Srila Prabhupada went through all the same motions as with part 1, arranging the papers, checking the proofs, and overseeing the binding. When part 2 of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam finally arrived from the press in January of 1964, Srila Prabhupada went to all the same libraries and educational institutions to distribute the book and also gave copies to Manohar Bookshop in Daryaganj, where the sales of his first edition of the Bhagavatam had been very good. Mr. Manohar Lal Jain, the bookshop proprietor, was very impressed by Srila Prabhupada's English translation, as it contained the Sanskrit verses, transliterations, and the word for word synonyms, and there was no other book like it available in the book market. He had sold around 200 copies of part 1 to customers in India and abroad and expected part 2 be just as successful. Manohar Lal Jain. He would come to me for selling his books. He would come often and he used to chat with me for 1 or 2 hours. He had no other business except selling his books as much as possible. We would discuss the difficulties he was having and also many other things, yoga, Vedanta, and religious aspects of life. His problem was distributing his work because it was a big publication. He had planned to publish it in many volumes. Naturally, I told him it was not possible for any individual bookseller or publisher here to publish it and invest money in it. So that was a little bit of a disappointment for him because he could not bring out more volumes. But my sales were good because this was the best edition with Sanskrit text and English translations. No other such edition was available. I sold about 150 to 200 copies. The price was very little, only 16 rupees. He had published his reviews and he had a good sale, a good market. The price was reasonable and he was not interested in making money. He was printing in English for the foreigners. He had a good command of Sanskrit as well as English. When we met, we would speak in English and his English was very impressive. He wanted me to publish, but I didn't have any praise or finances. I told him frankly I would not be able to publish it because it was not 1 or 2 volumes but many. But he managed anyhow. I referred him to Atmaram and Sons. He also used to go there. He was a great master, a philosopher, a great scholar. I used to enjoy the talks. He used to sit with me for 1 or 2 hours, as much as he could afford. Sometimes he would come in the morning, 11 or 12, and then sometimes in the afternoon. He used to come in for money. How many copies are sold? So I would pay him. Practically, he was not doing very well with finances at that time. He wanted that His books should be sold to every library and wherever the people are interested in it. We used to publish a catalog every month, and I would advertise his books. Orders would be coming from all over the world. So, at least for me, the sales were picking up. If I sold 100 copies of the first volume, then I figured the second volume
हाँ इसको हो गया
would be sold in the same number, naturally. But definitely, those who would take the first volume would also take volume 2 because it was institutional and the institutions will always try to complete their set. He used to discuss with me how the volumes can be brought out and how many it would take to complete the Srimad Bhagavatam. He was very much interested in bringing out the whole series. Staying in Delhi to promote his books, Srila Prabhupada arranged to meet the Vice President of India, Dr. Zakir Hussain, at his official residence. Dr. Hussain had already written an application for Srila Prabhupada's previous edition of Srimad Bhagavatam, and Srila Prabhupada was going to present him with part 2. Although a Muslim, Dr. Hussain was a scholar and took interest in all religious matters. At the meeting, he had inquired from Srila Prabhupada how love of God could help humanity at large. Srila Prabhupada later wrote a lengthy letter to the Vice President explaining in great detail the answer to his question. During March, Pandit Sri Krishna Sharma arranged for Srila Prabhupada to spend a month at the Sri Radha Vallabh Mandir in the Rosanpura Nesar area of Delhi, where he lectured both morning and evening on Srimad Bhagavatam. The program was well advertised with billboards and pamphlets, and the temple authorities encouraged the local congregation to take full advantage of such a rare opportunity to hear from a learned and scholarly Vaishnav sadhu like A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. Prabhupada meets Prime Minister Sastri. In June 1964, yes, Guru Maharaj. In June 1964, arrangements were made by a mutual friend for Srila Prabhupada to meet the newly elected Prime Minister of India, Lal Bahadur Shastri, at a formal engagement in the gardens of the Parliament building. Srila Prabhupada presented the Prime Minister with a complimentary copy of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. An official photographer at the event took a photo of the Prime Minister receiving the book from Srila Prabhupada. A pious Hindu from the Brahman caste, Prime Minister Shastri, impressed by the first English edition of the Bhagavatam, discussed its contents with Srila Prabhupada. Later, Prime Minister Shastri personally wrote to Srila Prabhupada thanking him for the gift of Srimad Bhagavatam and complimented him on his valuable contribution to the humanity while suggesting that government institutions and libraries should purchase copies of the book. Within days, the Ministry of Education wrote to Srila Prabhupada requesting 50 copies of Srimad Bhagavatam Part 2. At the end of June, Srila Prabhupada returned to Vrindavan in order to start the translation of the third and final part of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. In July, Srila Prabhupada made a trip to Bombay in the hope of meeting the owner of the Sindhya Steamship Company, the well-known philanthropist Miss, Mrs. Sumati Morarji, in order to secure a donation for printing part 3 of Srimad Bhagavatam. After making the long journey from Vrindavan and having spent a number of days waiting, Srila Prabhupada was unable to secure an appointment to meet the very busy Mrs. Sumati Morarji. He therefore resolved to sit on the steps in front of the Sindhya Lines Company office with the hope of seeing Mrs. Morarji as she left the building for home in the evening. Sure enough, after waiting some 5 or 6 hours, Mrs. Morarji finally emerged from the building late in the evening and seeing Srila Prabhupada sitting there on the steps, inquired from her secretary about who the elderly sadhu was. After hearing that Srila Prabhupada had been trying to get an interview with her, she immediately approached Srila Prabhupada and asked what service he could render. Srila Prabhupada informed her about his translation of the Srimad Bhagavatam and the need for a donor to print the final part of the first canto. Mrs. Morarji told Srila Prabhupada to meet her the next day in order to discuss the matter further. The next day, Srila Prabhupada presented part 1 and 2 of his Srimad Bhagavatam to Mrs. Sumati Morarji and also showed her the unfinished manuscript of part 3 which he was still working on. Being impressed with Srila Prabhupada's translation of the Bhagavatam, Sumati Morarji agreed to pay for the entire printing cost. His mission accomplished, Srila Prabhupada very happily returned to Vrindavan and immediately started work on the final part of the first canto. In order to promote the English translations of his Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada organized a special Janmashtami celebration.
वो लोग पढ़ते रहो उधर
Janmashtami celebrations held on August 31st, 1964 at the Radha Damodar Mandir in Vrindavan and invited the governor of Uttar Pradesh, Sri Vishwanath Das, to be the honorary guest as at the celebration. The program was well attended and Srila Prabhupada sang a number of Gaudiya Vaishnava bhajans.
लेट जाइएगा आज लेट जाइए अच्छा हाँ नया है
Yes, yes.
मैं मेडिसिन ले रहा हूँ
हाँ मेडिसिन दे दो
दो बार नहीं करो
यहाँ से बढ़ा दो। हाँ ऐसा ही। अभी तो टाइम है आपके पास 45 मिनट, 6:30 6:30। हाँ बड़ा होगा। बड़ा गाड़ी है ही। ठीक से लगाओ था उधर, ठीक से लगाना है।
श्री राधा